Okay, I think everything's working now. Hi, folks. Um, Trying to sort out a few things here today. And, there's always the problem with so many different components and trying to make something come together is that inevitably, something goes wrong at the last possible minute. So aggravating. But that's how it goes, right? Okay, so I hope everybody's had a good week and well, all around, and that all the things you wanted to happen happened. I have, but it's also been a very busy week. Happy day of corporate Valentines, and happy days of just enjoying some time with people. I hope that's a good one for everybody. But bear in mind, as nice as an idea as it is, it's a corporately arranged event. So don't feel too much pressure there. Okay, so I've got, just moving my monitor forward because, sometimes it shifts around. Okay, so I've got, I had a real challenge today. This is what I was talking about when I was talking about the technical stuff. The original art for this page for today was, because it's yellow pencil on this dark blue cardstock, it took 3 scans to get that to be something, which was a little bit aggravating. And so, this is the quality that I finally rested on, and it made me really wonder, how much do I like this? Because it looks the color's just odd. So I've got to sort this out in the scanning process. So this is why I haven't posted yet today, because you don't want to lose the work you've done, but at the same time, if you're not, feeling it, and you're like, I tried a thing and the thing didn't work out. Whereas last year I'd just go, here's the page. This year I'm trying to do a little bit more of a, standing by the thing I'm doing. What we got here? We got Robert. Good morning. Good morning, Robert. How are you today, sir? I hope you're having a good day and a good week all around. Okay, so I'm just checking a couple things. So I've got, in addition to the one-page stories that I'm doing, we're gonna do some digital fun today. In addition to the one-page stories that I've been doing, I make these, and what these are is, this is me plotting and planning as I'm doing. These are all the different pages for a full book project that I'm finishing off now. And in the course of finishing it off, it's something that I started in previous year, and 80-page book, and 16 pages need to be finished. And you look at the book and you realize I just got to do these 16 things. But a challenging thing can happen over time is that you start at this point in your creative journey, and then you realize, I don't work like this point anymore. There's a X amount of changes that have happened along the way. So these 18 pages, as I'm roughing them out, they look a little bit different than the pre-existing pages that are ready for the book. And so, it's a little challenging. Anyway, so I'm looking at some of the things, and this is my workaround. The page, this is a page from the book, and you can see the text size is really tiny. So I'm going to have to do text through the whole book just to unify it all, because it shifts and changes from each different thing. And there's a stylistic change with each chapter in the story. That's fine. That works. But there needs to be an existing scale or an existing approach, that sort of, what I mean by scale, is text. And there needs to be a consistent approach to the 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 overall book. There has to be some kind of unifying factor, and text is a good way to do that. But you can just see there's just X amount of changes over time, and stylistically there's a few different changes on finishes, but it's all workable. So these are just the different examples throughout different points in the book. So, so how I'm drawing now is a little bit different. And how I'm finishing pages, there's a little more growth in this. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge to try to figure out how to take these 18 remaining pages and to unify the whole of the story with them. So we'll see how it goes. But this is the book that's planned for release next. So this will be the one that's coming out if next quarter. Susanna's joined us. Hi, Susanna. How are you? Okay, so here's today's page. I'm not going to bounce around from screen to screen. I'm pretty much going to stick with what you see here. Now, I'm going to try something different, though. And what I'm going to try different is I'm about to load up two separate pages, one in a portrait format and one in a landscape format. So there's our portrait, and here is our landscape. So let me get rid of a lot of these other pages that I've had open to show you pretty pictures. So I've talked about this a number of times, and the challenge of when we're telling stories and we're trying to have a sort of unified approach to here's the way my story points progress, here's the way, and so what I'm referring to in this, and I'm just going to jump up a layer here, and then I'll write this in red. So I've talked, why don't I use the right tool? Get it on the pen, dummy. So I've talked about this a number of times, and that is here, get my name out of the way, here to here. So it doesn't matter how many panels and whatnot, or if it's a single panel or whatever it is that gets us from the top left, right? Top shelf, top left. I don't know why I did that, but to the bottom right, and so the same principle applies here. So that as we're doing the top left, bottom right principle, we can have however many panels we want to have in order to get us there. Whether it's one big splash panel or whether it's a whole bunch of little ones that follow along, these different levels. Why not? You could do 16 panels, you can do 16 or 1, and the same principle, of course, you could do, all these little panels, or you could do one big panel. So it's the same with 16 or 1. So everything's the same. It's just that it's the orientation that's different, right? And so the challenge of that is presented is then the stylistic approach of how we're going to go about doing that, because when you get set into a format style, and so I've done X amount of pages in this portrait format that's on the screen now, and you get into a rhythm and you get into a vocality that sort of suits the way, a visual vocality that suits the way you break down the images and the pacing and the story in according to this format, this layout, this portrait oriented page. And so just to go back, that's portrait, just for anybody that might be interested in this part of it that isn't aware, and this is your landscape. So that's the fundamental change, right? So depending on how you find yourself oriented, if you want to do upright, portrait, or horizontal, landscape, you start to develop a consistency or a visual sort of identity. Now, different people will try different approaches and different stylistic responses, oftentimes influenced by the people that they appreciate. So if you've got, so with that appreciation, if you've got a certain aesthetic that you've always enjoyed, like let's say it's Marvel Comics or DC Comics, the sort of Western, those I use those primary two just because they're the larger parts of the superhero market. They're not the largest part of the North American market. That's Scholastic and Viz, but it's easier to say Marvel and DC and people know what you're talking about. So there's a visual language that comes into place with both those companies, and they follow this principle where we've got top left, bottom right. But then you'll see different structural layouts on pages, and it has a lot to do with how each individual artist tells their story. Oftentimes you'll have artists that will, they'll use frames like so, and they'll break their page down in a really organized fashion so that there's this sort of uniformity of the panels, so that as they start to come in and lay in their panels like so on their page, they've got this sort of clear way of approaching the page. So you've got these 9 relatively similar sized panels. I know they're not. And that works fine. I mean, that way that person feels comfortable to tell from top left to bottom right. And when you've got these separate panels here, and I'll use this example here. So if you've got your top left, bottom right, then it's pretty straightforward that they're going to do variations within here of the size of their panels. But you notice that it's still following top left, bottom right. And so that visual language starts to hold on and hold true. And, by the same course of action, you'll see other artists that are utilizing the same format. And so what they're doing is they're taking the same approach, but they're using a different visual style. So they'll get their, whoops, I'm so sorry. Let me go back one there. So they'll get their top panel. That's straightforward. I'll drop this out. And then the next panel is going to be embedded underneath, right? Or it'll take up the top half of the page. So now that first panel is sitting there within, so panel 1, which is here, is sitting within panel 2. Hi, Linda. Welcome aboard. Hiya, Tim. And so then when they lay in their third panel, okay, they're going to, enclose that within the same design. And then the fourth panel may well sit below that. So, and just to more readily identify this panel, I'm just going to go over it a couple of times so you recognize that that sits on top of the others. And we'll do this. So, so there's your third panel. This is sort of like a space or a void or a divisional area. And then there's their fourth panel. So you've got your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. You've got your 1, 2, 3, 4, and I mean, you could even go so far as to break up this into 4 and 5. So it's just about how they lay it out. And some people use a more dynamic assortment of panels on that page. One isn't any more legitimate than the other. As long as both of them are telling the same story and getting those same key notes, those same key beats in the story, that's fine. It's when you start seeing, a lot of people like the image aesthetic from the 1990s, and generally a lot of people that are in their 40s, because you have a fond reminiscence of what you saw when you were a child. And, that's fine. But a challenge with a lot of the 90s books is there's a lot of verbosity that goes on that page. Lots of dialogue, lots of word balloons, and a random static image of, might be a dynamic image, but it's a singular image of somebody swinging through the air or flying through the sky, or even if they're holding on to a helicopter that was falling and they've got 3 people in this arm that they've saved from it, it's still a singular image with all of this text around it, as opposed to the possibility of, somebody's hand grabbing the lapel at the back of somebody's suit jacket and holding them up in the air as they're making a gripping face as they're holding up the helicopter. And then we go to the open shot of here's the helicopter, here's the people. Now there's a story being told. You can still overlay all that with the dialogue, but now you're more readily engaging the reader in the actions therein, and it leads the reader more into the intensity of the scene. Whereas when you just open book up and you see splash page, you don't get that. And so in that instance, I think that leads to a challenge storytelling wise that a lot of people fall into, right? There's a principle that was told to me by someone, and I'm not going to name their name, but their idea is that a page needs to be this. I'm going to show 3 squares, same as I did before. And so their idea is this. Robert says it was me, I told him. Their idea is this. And so we're going to draw, well, let's do that there and get rid of this nonsense. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 panels. And so the idea that they presented is this, is that they've got Bob, hi, I'm Bob, and Bill, hi, I'm Bill. And Bob and Bill are conversing as they're going this way to their objective, okay? And so as they're going there, Bob can say something to Bill, okay? Have I done them wrong? No. Yes, I have. Bob is going to say something to Bill. The reason I did the arms different is to help to differentiate the two of them. So, and then the next panel, we've cut back a little bit on Bob. Let's say we're, silhouetting him out, and we're focusing more in this panel on Bill's response, right? So this is Bob talks, this is Bill talks, and then we've got some kind of, and you can change angle or whatever you want to do, but you've still got Bob and Bill walking down the street together. And, this is a sort of the key point in that conversation. One person's posited the idea, and the other person has responded to the query, and then the two of them come to some combination in the conversation. They come to some sort of agreement or disagreement, and then the final thing is at, so now we've got Bob and Bill that have reached the objective point that was presented in our first panel. And so somebody that has been in the industry for a long time told me that this is the way any storytelling page should be broken down. Robert has a thing for Bob. So, which sounds great, right? And noticing their early work, there was a lot more fluidity and not a lot more dynamism in the panels that they were laying out, and a lot more differentiation. And then looking at their recent work in the last 10 years, man, is every third page presented this way. I was really surprised by it, but because unfortunately, sometimes when we find a thing that works, we really rest in that. And that's why I'm not saying their name, because I don't want to dismiss them and their career. So, you can fall into sometimes formulaic traps in how we present our pages, how we present our layouts. I'm not saying that this is wrong. This is actually a really great way to have our story progress from here to here. Because if you notice, here goes to there. Okay, we come back to here, which goes to there. we come back to here, which goes to there, and we end up here. So it follows, that pattern we've talked about. So one of the challenges is sticking with this formulaic approach to how our page is broken down. It's not a lot different from the 9-panel one. If you're always going to draw 9 panels, you're going to get trapped in there. Now, there's really fine examples like Dave Gibbons doing Watchmen with Alan Moore, and also I would say Keith Giffen doing the Legion of Superheroes 5-year later period. They both use 9-panel format. Recently, let me think of the artist's name, did, what's it called? I'm looking it up on the shelf. And the light's in my eyes. Threshold. There's a series called Threshold. And then another series by the same artist, I think it is. Oh, Tom Rainey did Omega Men. No, Tom Rainey did Threshold. And he used primarily this 9-panel format in certain spots. And then he would open up on this page. And when he would open up the page so that you saw, a larger panel like this, where you'd have this top part of the page is just one static image, right? And then you've got your 9-panel format, but all of this panel here, is one large picture. And it's sort of, there's our scene, and intro characters, intro everybody into this context. But basically, this is what I call the contextual narrative. So this is establishing where our story is and what's going on. And so then they'll go to the 9-panel the 6 remaining panels will all be locked into that format, and that's great. And when they move into lots of action, lots of intensity, they'll break into these 3 panels. It's a really interesting progression. What am I missing here? Susanna says, you went to a jam. What was the flavor? Strawberry? I love blackberry flavor. It was in that kind of jam. Susanna, it was groove. Anyways, so some of the challenges that present how we approach a page. It's important that we remember that underlying factor. It's important that we remember, here to here in the progression of our page. How you get there is determined by your sensibilities and your approach to those foundational rules, those the basics, and that's what makes your story sing with your own voice. So when I switched to the landscape format myself, and the reason that it's the same principles, right? Where we're going from here to here. The reason I switched to the landscape format for telling my stories is that I wanted to break from the portrait. I wanted to break from that norm. I'd done, in 2022, I'd done 95 pages, 95 finished one-page stories, and I noticed that, okay, so now we're getting a little bit, routine in how I approach it. So I wanted to shake it up. So that's why I changed the orientation of the page, went to the landscape format. And then I had this kind of empathetic moment where I'm like, this just feels like it changes everything. And so, and there's not a lot of, real differences where you go from these horizontal pages here, these horizontal planes where we're moving across like so. Or you can break your page out like, let me move these, and you can break your page out in these vertical planes, and then that's just the same. There's just something about, switching over to that landscape format that just gave me a sense of new real estate. It's, if it's like you're used to building houses in the desert, and now you're building it on a beachfront. There's a whole different sort of set of rules that you feel like you get to learn in the structure of it, right? Robert says, I break down the amount of panels to use to suggest how fast the story should go. More panels, slower scene. Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, that's part of the foundational stuff. So if we've talked about that before with the pacing and how you want to, expedite the reader along the page, or you want to slow the reader so that they invest a little more time. And because if you're drawing your big fancy dance scene with all of these explosions and people punching people and all kinds of things like that, unless your visual clarity, unless the visual sophistication has a good amount of clarity, it's just going to be mud, and it's going to be people just go big fight scene and move on. Whereas if you have a little bit of dynamism to it, and where you can see such and such, punching this way, and another person's pulling the head off a robot, and another person's kicking through a robot's chest, so that it gives the reader things to move around and see. Robertson, is it Craig Robertson, who drew Transmetropolitan, inked by Ramos. And I mean, there's some fantastic stuff where you can look in a crowd scene in a large panel, and you get to see all kinds of different people with different visual aspects to them, dancing about and walking around in these crowd shots. And you can see somebody's, discomfort with another person close to them, and somebody else, being gregarious. And it's there's a moment where somebody gives you a large contextual image, and at the same time gives a ton of things for you to look at and spend some time with it. So that there are moments where the large panel still slows the reader down, because there's enough visual sophistication and embedded within that panel. But that's not to say everybody does that. More than likely the majority of people just go crowd scene and move on. But there are some writers that are Derek Robertson that drew Transmetropolitan. So there are some artists that will give all kinds of information in those large panels that still demands that the reader slows it down. What have we got? Oh, Doug Rogers has joined us. Hi, Doug. Welcome aboard. So, Doug, if I can use you as an example, Doug set up a really beautiful story, and so it takes place, and there's this large group scene, and I think it's 60 some odd, if I'm not mistaken, 60 some odd dancers performing on this stage, and so here's this wide open shot, but because of the visual complexity of all these people doing their own specific way of moving, there's a sort of you take the time and you move your eye around in that image to see all the different little facial expressions and shoulder movements different from one to the next. So it gives you all kinds of characterization that way. So there are challenges. What I'm generally referring to is more like there's a time and a place for the splash scene. There's a time and a place for, if Spider-Man is for the 700,000th time swinging through the New York skyline as he's going back to his apartment, where he hopes that his wife hasn't noticed he snuck out to go and fight crime while she was sleeping. There's only so much that you can do with that if the writer has written it in such a way as that there's nothing compelling and interesting happening other than he's swinging through the sky. The splash page in that instance is serviceable. And people like those moments. People like those, there's Spider-Man, he's so awesome, I wish I could swing on a web. They're good with that, and if that suits them fine, then that suits them fine. Well done, story point. So, but if you do a whole book of that, where it's just him swinging to the apartment, swinging out of the apartment, swinging back into the apartment, swinging in, swinging out. Or every time somebody punches, it's a splash page. Pow! People aren't going to eventually invest that time because it becomes routine and doldrum. So switching to the landscape format, I still have the left, right, top left, bottom right approach to things. It's just I'm trying to find variations within there to do that. So sometimes, I'll have these different vertical panels, and sometimes I'll lay in. It'll be more of a horizontal panel lay in, or oftentimes you want to get as much real estate as you can, so you'll top half, bottom half, right? But you're still moving from that top left, bottom right. So what I've been trying to do is, so I've got a routine for that. And so now what I've really been encouraging myself to do more so, and that is what I talked about recently, towards the end of last year, and that is Wally Wood's 22 panels. And if you get a chance, look those up. Take a look. There's all kinds of fun things in there. But applying some of those things, like applying, if this is the panel here, I'm just going to go over it again. So if this top, no, with that, I'll just do this. So if this is the panel, that's the size of the panel itself. And I've got, here's this character talking, and then here's this character talking. I'll break out of those panels. I'll break out, to, somewhat measurable equal distance outside of those two panels, so that it's almost like the background of the panel itself is a frame within a frame, and it, to me, that just sort of keeps it a little more energy, but less so of just people talking and doing that. I find that there's benefit to doing, if you've got, here's your panel, and then you've got, here's your guy punching fist, as he's, flying forward, little fist, towards the camera, then there's something to be said for that energy jumping out of the panel. That's kind of fun. That gives something different. Is there a 22 panels that always work from Alex Toth? No, but that's a great question, Doug. Here we go. So I've got the Alex Toth books, and Alex has some rules that he applies. The unfortunate reality is that this is how he applies them. So I'm going to hold this up in the camera. So you see how verbose that is, right? It's a lot of text and a few visual representations, right? But, and this goes on for a few pages. Okay. And so, yeah. So he has a whole bunch of examples that he himself gives, but it's more talking about interesting ways of compositional flow and how you can establish solid character storytelling techniques that aren't dull. And so this is where he talks about switching out the perspective. What I talked about here, let me see if I can find the right one. Not that. Little notes. Was it? No. Oh, there it is. Okay. So when I talked about this presentation, where we've got two guys going towards a house, because the first guy of the two is talking, where the camera's more attentive to them, and then we've pushed them out into a silhouette, or slightly reversed that 45 angle so that it promotes the second guy talking. And then to unify, or get a consensus of that opinion, we've now cut both of them into the shot in some kind of equal measure. And then they've made it to their objective location that they're going to. Or in the instance of an ongoing serial, that there's something that happens at the end of that page that you show the response of the two of them that draws the reader to the next page. But Toth talks a lot about this, but he talks about a lot about this over the course of pages, not just this simple singular page approach, which is what this one artist that I knew said, this is the only thing that works. So whereas Toth talks about the back and forth dialogue happening, I'll put that back up, so that you can have, so I'm going to do it in blue, so you can have these different panels where you've got, Bob, Bill talking, and then the next panel we've got Bob silhouetted out, and we're focusing on Bill's response, and he's pointing a finger at Bob, and you smell like soup, and then Bob's got his hand up, what, me? I smell like soup? And then Bill says, yes, you do, but he wants to make sure that it's not just this boring back and forth, guys. We've got Bill's shoulder here. Okay, and we've gone back to show Bob, and Bill's zoned out. And there, as Bill's responding, we're cutting out and we're putting the back of Bill, or Bill's, I'm calling them silhouettes, but it's the back of the first character. And then, here's the one guy slumped, and I smell like soup. And the second guy leaning back, ha 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 ha, I've hurt his feelings. So that's, Toth really talks about that a lot. And while this is more of a static approach to the same thing, Toth would often use a lot of really dynamic action that's moving like this. Like it's where the arrows are really flying forward and giving a sense of coming back. And then you've got somebody moving in this direction and going over here and coming down there. And so if the two guys are, it's hard to use this two-guy principle with that. Let's say there's a car. So you've got your car, okay, and your car is going across the scene. There's this little window, and here's these two guys, woohoo, in the car. And as the car, Toth would even go so far as to draw the car spinning around and the two guys going, whoa, and almost going out the side, so that as we get to the next page, and here's the car on a road, Toth's drawn the road so that you presuppose that the car is going to go this way. And then there's another shot of the car doing a Dukes of Hazzard over a hill. And here's the two guys in car, and then we've got the car, crashing on its side, and one guy's going flying out of the car, and the other guy's, crashing within it. And then we've got our big car wreck down at the bottom. Like that would be more of a Toth thing, because he's absolutely brilliant for that energy. And there's a lot of examples you can find of Toth where he's got a character dancing. I think there's one called Steps, I think it is. And it's just like 8 pages of him dancing. But even though there's a somewhat formulaic approach here, he's defying it already. He's putting multiple images of the same action in a panel. He's got this big directional changes, and big focus changes. This is much more closely focused. These are pushed back to get more of the scene around it. What does Doug say? Doug says, Toth is always moving the camera. Wood seems more bound to pure sequence. Oh, definitely. Toth is... Okay, early television, let's look at it from this perspective. Early television, The Prisoner, okay? No, let's do The Fugitive. The Fugitive has the principal character being chased by the secondary character. And so they would always do these shots where partially in studio, partially out in the world, but it felt like a stage. It felt like a staged theatrical play, and oftentimes you would have this set piece where everything took place on, and here's the guys running into the farm, and here's the the porch of this little shack. And then a lot of these the next few scenes are taking place, and they've manufactured the front of that shack and built it on the set. And so all these scenes that are taking place in front of that shack are far more controlled. That's what Wood feels like to me. Whereas when you get to The Prisoner, The Prisoner has these crazy shots of him driving his car in front of an airplane, and then here he comes out of his little apartment at the village, and so we're in this nice little close shot of him coming out of his apartment door, and then we open up into a vista, onto this view of the various layers of this crazy little village that he lives in, and here's the little garden area in the center of town, and he goes down into it. Now we're within this scene, and yet we've got this splendor of the garden shot behind us. That's what Toth feels like to me. And like I said, this applies to what I was referring to earlier. I'm sorry, where that's that visual style of those creators. That's where that's coming in. So whereas Wood, and both are absolutely legitimate, and both are absolutely masters of their craft. But their style, what makes them who they are, is how it comes across. I mean, Kirby has an interesting thing that no one's ever standing still. When Kirby would draw his panels, even when people are at rest, they're not. If Sue Storm, the Invisible Woman character from the Fantastic Four, is giving her scientist husband, Mr. Fantastic, a hard time because he spends all of his time in the lab and he forgets to focus on her and everybody else and the larger problems of the world around them, while he might be in the lab with this kind of a slumped over his doodad, and there he is looking into the device and the machine, and here he is all into his science business. So his action is, his body has got this directional movement, whereas she'll stand behind him, and she'll have her, if she's got her hands at her sides, and she's like, read, and he puts this energy into those characters. So even when they're at still, they're moving. There's always this directional energy because you can feel this sort of flow in her form. So again, there's another master of their craft who's doing the exact same things as those other two guys in a completely different way. I never appreciated Kirby as a kid because Kirby has these really chunky, like if somebody's hand's coming forward, he's got these really chunky fingers, on the hand, and you look at that and you're like, what in the world's going on? And then you realize, in order for him to have this sort of, if this is the hand and it's flying off of the arm, and we go back to the shoulder, and somebody's punching as hard as they can, he gives this dynamic energy and this form, and he plays with and he adjusts that form because he has a complete understanding of it. Because you can't necessarily do that, right? Unless you have that foundational of understanding of form and perspective. Doug says, with Wood, even when they're moving, they're still. Completely agree. There's a thing with some of those guys like Wood, is that here's the guys, here's somebody jumping, and they've got one leg here, and they've got the other leg there, and they've got the one arm there, and their hand in the foreground, with their little laser gun. And that's movement, that is, but you got to think about, well, is he jumping? Is he running? That little hiccup often can make your brain go, is he moving or not? And there's a lot of this, the pointing stance, where somebody is saying, over there are the primitives. That way, straight, rigid arm. There they are. You can't see it. Is that better? Arm pointing just straight out. And which draws your focus and attention and does the storytelling technique of getting your eyes to go from there. to where he's pointing to. But it's not the same level of energy that Kirby would do the same thing, because he'd have somebody's entire form moving into the point. Like their whole body would be warping towards, look at that guy. And it's, just a completely different way of drawing the same visual point. But back to what you were talking about today. It's about moving your eye across the page, for sure. In all of these guys that we've talked about, Wood, Kirby, Toth, who else have I talked about? Tom Rainey, who's a contemporary artist that's very good. All of these different examples, they all just have their own way of doing it, from left to right. One of the challenges that Doug, who's in the chat and is my partner in crime, that we've been doing the comic jams for a long time together here in London. And one of the challenges that presents itself is that oftentimes we'll see this. And let me just get rid of this. Oftentimes what we'll see is that if the first person does a panel that's this big, then subsequently every other person that does a panel, it's going to be somewhat similar in size. And even if there's not enough room, you still got somebody following just this line across. And while that's great, with that repetition of panel, some of the people that'll have, so here's let's call this a small moment, right? And somebody picks up a cup, then they pour in some tea, and then explosion. And so, that doesn't work, because we've got picks up a cup, there's its note, pours some tea, there's its note. Explosion should have fun. Explosion should be, look at this, broken cup. There you go. There's the arm of the cup. There's the saucer, somehow still intact. But we won't see that. Oftentimes when you're seeing people jam with one another, it'll just be this, there's a lot of a uniformity applied. And that, or a complete abandonment of uniformity, and it'll be clearly, here's this random shape panel, and then somebody draws this small shape because they're comfortable with it, and the next person draws something crazy that's going on in here. And so any kind of rhythmic device is lost in the storytelling. So oftentimes that'll happen. But that comes across that way because people don't understand that the progression of here to here has to have, like Robert and Doug are both speaking to, and that is, it has to have that rhythmic application, right? So it can be really challenging to try to carry that across. The example that I always use is this. So we've got Bob, right? And Bob is standing here with his arm holding open the door of the refrigerator, and standing at said refrigerator, and Bob, where's the milk? There's our first panel. So there's our first note. That's the number one C, right? There's your context. There's your character introduction. There's your scenario introduction. And then the second part of this is, well, you can continue that part of number one where, Bob says to himself, Eureka, I've got an idea, and I'm going to the store to get some milk. So he puts on his hat and out the door he's going to go. And so Bob's on his way to go to the store and get some milk. Oh, happy day. So that's still a continuation of that idea. As Doug says, and I'm drawing a cow in that second panel. More than likely. For those that aren't aware, and please go and look at, I always stress this, please go and look at the work of all the other people that you might see in the chat on the video, because there's a lot of really fantastic artists here. just to give you an insight into Doug, somebody has a couple of superheroes saying, "Hey, we want you to join the Justice League," and the second panel, Doug gets a hold of, and he draws a rock in the grass and says, "Why me? Well, I'm honored." it's like, and it's very evidently very clearly, very evidently a rock in the grass, and it's just 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 a left swing, just right out of the left field. I just love it. So I always use this example because there's your first C of the four, right? You got your context, you got you've got oh, for heaven's sakes, your context, the larger part of the content of the whole story, the climax of it, or the content part. I also call the conflict. So context, conflict, climax, conclusion, right? So the whole of this remaining page brings us to, here's Bob on his hands and knees crawling towards the store that he sees in the distance. Okay. And store. And after all he's been through in the entire page, and as he gets his milk, so here he is, he's holding up the milk. Yay, container of milk. And then he realizes that, whoops, we got no money. I forgot my wallet, So there's his empty pockets. So and then, of course, it forces the reader to go back to the beginning. Whoops, I'm sorry. It forces the reader to go back to the beginning that way, so that we understand that the story is cyclical in that nature, right? So there's by having number 2, let's put the pen back up. By having number 2 be all of this section, this could be a UFO invasion. This can be a massive fissure opens up on the sidewalk along the way. Giant cows fall out of the sky. You can have all kinds of funny milk symbology happen to Bob along the way as he goes to the store, where he just wants his pitcher of milk. And when he gets to the store, there's the climax of everything. He's made it past all of these conflicts. And so here's our climax point. Here's our conflicts, or the content, right? And then there's the context at the start. And there's our conclusion. And whether our conclusion is open-ended or closed-ended, he gets to the place, gets the milk jug eats him. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It's what the individual person does. But there's so much that can be done in this that doesn't have to follow this formulaic panel-to-panel approach. I mean, you can have this fantastic montage of spaceships coming in and attack cows coming from the horizon, and it's just a shot of Bob, who's got the one hand up and the other hand down. Whoops. As he's running to get free and try to stay away from all these crazy things happening to him, so that by the time he gets to the store, you felt all of this intensity of all these giant things happening to him along the way. But you don't have to stick to this conformed panel-to-panel approach. And in how you frame those panels, if this gives us this beat right here, and this gives us this beat right here, and then all of this interaction with all this visual information, despite the fact that these panels, they read quick as a single note, honestly, you're still reading this like this: what happens here, what happens here, what happens there, what happens there, what happens there, what happens there. You're still following those beats because the tonality has been established by having those first 2 panels the same size. And so then when we get to the bottom of the page of 1, 2, 3, we're back. We've just reaffirmed that rhythmic element, so that the reader understands the whole page on a subconscious level, that it plots out in this sort of a rhythm without them consciously being aware of it. I don't know. It just sort of comes. We start to figure out these things over time. And so some of those different elements we talked about with how Wood's 22 panels represent all kinds of different options of open panels and bursting out of panels, and deep silhouettes and forced perspectives and all kinds of interesting things to break away from the mold of just 26 pages of talking heads, and have a little bit of energy, despite the fact that, like, who was it, Doug, or was it Robert? It was Doug that said there's still a degree of, static characters, but it's just a little more, there's a little more diversity of visual images in order to keep our eyes moving. So it's all about what we find ourselves to sort of get us, figuring out what our own visual language is. And you can spend all the time in the world reading other people's books, and I know which ones I like and I know which ones I don't like, without really understanding why you like certain things and you dislike other things. And but then again, at the same time, you can have this aesthetic understanding that I find this style of art pleasing and that style of art displeasing. But there is some benefit to be had of looking at those two different examples and trying to figure out why. What is it about the way that these illustrators, what are the similarities in the way that they convey story visually that is dissimilar from the way these creators, create their story, that doesn't work for you. So if people can figure out the differences of those two, and you don't have to make copious notes, and you don't have to draw on your pages or try the lines and the things, although people do that. If that works for you, it works for you. But you can just start to pay attention to things and realize, oh, okay, I see. I like these splash panels that appear in order to introduce the scene. That helps me to be understanding where they are now. And it's not just the visual aspect to this. It's the union between the text and the pictures. It does help people to say, planet Earth, and here's this fight taking place here, and then planet Mars, and here's the situation on Mars, and planet Venus, nothing going on. Anyways, so it does help the reader to understand, with the textual element, sometimes where the jump and shift of things are, if the similarities of them are if the visuals of them are very similar. So, there are things that you find that you like, and there's things that you find that you don't like, and that's all well and great. So that's, your steps 1, 2, 3 there for the appreciation part of it. But then for those that want to do it themselves, what's next? And yes, there's all the basics. How do I take this, put it on the surface, and make them? What am I doing? I didn't put the thing on. And how do I, make some marks? And over time, how we make those marks, becomes our own, stylistic approach to making those marks, so that we, that kind of mark is by that artist. And so you're figuring out how you like to draw, and then the second part of that would be looking, those things that you appreciate and you enjoy. What can you learn from those to apply yourself? And it's the Northrop Frye principle. If anybody knows Northrop, what was that terrible writing? Northrop Frye. Who is an educator here in southwestern Ontario. The more that you appreciate something, the more that you sample of it, the more you read, the more discerning your taste in reading is. The more food that you eat, the more refined your palate's going to be for your taste buds. It's those two things are way too close. The more you read, the more sophistication you're going to have in the type of things you read. Is that better? So you're not just going to read, and I use this example, you're not just going to read Stephen King for the rest of your life. You're going to try similar writers to Stephen King. You're going to try Peter Straub's books and see what you think of those, or Clive Barker's books and see what you think of those. And then you'll figure out, over time, I'm not reading any more of these because I don't really like this part, the way that these books go. And I'm not really reading any of those for different reasons than that. But I appreciate this kind of writing for these reasons, And so maybe you find that you've switched to, 5 years after you start this journey, you've switched to Peter Straub. And you don't like Stephen King as much. Nothing against any of these writers, okay? I'm just picking names out of the top of my head. I had a great conversation with somebody last week, and it was talking about fantasy writers and how when they were a teenager, they liked Tolkien. But then as they grew up and they got a little bit older, they like George R. Martin and Ursula K. Le Guin, and and just didn't appreciate Tolkien as much. Like it was this, they got it, and that, but there's exciting new interesting things they're finding in those other authors. It's there's no right or wrong answer. For me, it was I really enjoyed Stephen R. Donaldson as a young person. I haven't read any of his. He did this really great series called Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever, and I think there were 6 books in total. He's written in numerous things. He might have even added another trilogy to that. I don't know, but because they were in sections of 3. But I enjoyed those at the time, and I enjoyed. But Dune, Frank Herbert's Dune, the first 2 books I really enjoyed. The third book started becoming a slog to get through, and it's just because maybe life and maybe my reading tastes were changing. I've looked at all of the other books after that, and I have zero interest in reading the rest of the Dune cycle. So it has nothing to do with the validity of one writer over another. It has everything to do with how we look at things and how our aesthetic appreciation changes. So, it's interesting that, but you might start drawing your pages in a very specific way that follows this sort of repetitive pattern modality. And you're going to, I really feel comfortable with this. And then over time, that, you start adding in rhythmic changes to things, and your pacing changes, and then eventually, even from that, now you've got characters that are stepping out of the panel. You've got this guy over here getting, he got smacked till Tuesday by a guy in the foreground, and there's no panel structure around those whatsoever. And then you've even gotten so far as to do a close-up shot of Buddy going, "Oh no," as he's flying through the air. And you've put that in a little balloon, just with a little arrow pointing down to that. Like you're doing all kinds of different things that you wouldn't have done in these earlier days. And you're still telling stories. It's just your approach to telling them is changing. And I think that the whole point of talking about this stuff today and why it was sitting on my head is that because I'm looking back on this old project that I started, a couple years ago, and it's an 80-page book that's missing 18 pages. And the way that I approach those 18 pages is so very different from how the earliest pages of that book are. So I have to figure out an approach that ties together the entirety of the book while inserting X amount of pages. And so sometimes in order to do that, I need to figure out, well, this here page doesn't work, but I can add in this page instead, and insert it into that. And, but turn that into a 2-page piece. And now I've got this page and this page, or this panel and this panel. And And so by evaluating process, evaluating where I was when and where I am now, and the fact that I just want to do something with this thing, but at the same time, I want to have it a unified, cohesive narrative that doesn't jar the reader too much. Of you can clearly tell today, and you can clearly tell yesterday, and the way that I've approached those. So it's tricky. One of the things that I've been doing is I'm sitting down with paper, with random sheets of paper, and I'm looking at the way I drew a guy running with his hand up, and here's the one leg up, and he's moving this way, and running, and so and evaluating as I'm drawing this scene that goes over the course of some pages, and there's one page from this cycle that's missing. I need to maintain some integrity towards this, not only the scene and the items that are involved in the scene and the characters that are involved in the scene, but if I'm going to do this insert page, and I'm going to put in different perspectives and different angles, and I'm going to have him more in the forefront, and where I've got a little more energy and how he's running here, and the character's moving, and he's coming closer to the panel, and there's a little more dynamism or a little more energy to it. Well, I still need to look at, maybe one of the things that I can do is, take the pacing of those panels on the earlier page, right, and replicate the pacing pattern, but with the insert, adding in a little more vitality to the characters, or maybe even occasionally inserting out of the panel break, or an unclosed panel, down here. So just to change it up, but at the same time try to maintain that pacing style, that small panel size that exists in that narrative. So it doesn't matter where we are in the course of our journey, right? It matters about an honesty and an earnestness about how we look about what we're doing, and trying to allow ourselves to look at the things that we've done before, and not just throw them out and go, oh, I'd do that completely different, I'm going to redraw the whole book. You can look at the things that you did that you look at now and go, those aren't as successful as things I may apply today, and figure out ways of taking what you had and maybe kicking in a little something, a little transitional change. If I have this pre-existing page that is finished, and all the beats work in it, and the story and everything else works in it, but this one panel I look at, and this doesn't need a closed box around it. It doesn't need a closed frame. I mean, if I was to take this panel where I've got this guy here, within the panel, and I go through and I just erase that area around that panel on that specific page, now I'm looking at some of those older pages and making very small alterations to it, so that I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And so that's why I started on this whole talk today, is that this is what's been rattling around in my head all morning, as I'm trying to come to terms with a better way to facilitate the completion of this book, without, again, making it all kinds of extra work, and at the same time tying it together so that it makes some cohesive sense. Not just as finishing out the story, but so that there's some cohesion to it with the visual elements as well. I'm curious if anybody else has gone through that, and if you have, throw it in the comments. And I'm curious as to if anybody else is looking at some larger objective that they set themselves before, that they didn't finish off. They didn't follow through on it for whatever reasons. You stubbed your toe, or you were involved in a plane crash, whatever it was, right? That sort of took you away from it. Or you looked at it and you're like, I don't want to draw this anymore. And now you look back on that thing and go, oh yeah, I could finish it, but what do I got to do to finish it? I'm curious if anybody else has gone through those processes, because I'm sure people have, right? I mean, there's a lot of similarities in how we all, have gone through different actions that are, not entirely much different from the person across from us. And when it comes to that stylistic approach and the fact that you may have changed over time, how would that affect you? I'm always curious about things like that with other people's journeys. So if anybody feels like sharing that, you're by far more than welcome to. I'll pick out, before I forget, I will pick out today's suggestion that I have to finish off to post. I'm going to post the page that I spoke about at the very beginning, the one that I've been drawing on in yellow pencil on a blue cardstock. When I scan it, the yellow is very dulled and the luminosity of the blue is cut down. And so that's why I haven't posted today's page yet, is that I want to pull that richness back out of the difference of the yellow and the blue. But right now it's really greening everything out. It's just sort of amalgamating those two colors. So I have to figure out what's going on with my scanner. So I will get those posted. I'll get that posted today, and I've got the mixed media page that we started yesterday that I'll post this weekend as well. But for Monday, what if Macaulay Culkin was my shadow self? That's going to be the page that I'll post on Monday. And that suggestion comes from our friend Marsh. I think I did one for Marsh recently. Maybe I should pick something different. Let's see, what do we got? A mysterious cat who stole a hot dog. There we go, straightforward. Teresa Lilly. Teresa, thank you for that suggestion. A mysterious cat who stole a hot dog is what I'll do for Monday. And so that's I think that's about it for me today. I've got a few things on the go, and I've got 2 lessons I'll plan for this weekend. So I'm gonna call it early today. I hope some of this rambling today has helped people out that might be, pursuing a specific, a similar plot to where I'm at the moment. And if so, great. I share it, let everybody else know what's going on as well. And, because they might have solutions that you require. You might have solutions that they require. So by all means, I'll be back on Monday. Now, before I forget, Tuesday, I will be streaming through the afternoon. It will be our little launch party for One Page Extravaganza Volume 2, which I've put as far away as possible. There we go. Yeah. There we go. Better get the bucket. So there'll be a little launch party for that. I've got a couple people that I'm asking as guests to come in and join in and chat, and and at the same time, I'm just trying to figure out the dynamics of that, because I got rid of StreamYard because they tried to charge me 3 times as much as what my membership was, which was really random and very expensive. We're going to try to figure out the in for, what people are in for with that, with how we're going to have some conversations, and I might have some people in the studio as well. We'll be doing a studio tour. We'll be doing, I wrote it down because I'm forgetful. There'll be Cat's Corner with Corbin. I've got a couple of videos that I'll be showing as well. And and then we'll do a whole page together over the course of the afternoon. And I mean, it's good for the whole afternoon. Where anybody so if I draw that first panel and it's Bob looking in the fridge wanting milk,
and I say, what do we draw for the next panel? And somebody says, draw a cow. Well, I'll draw a cow. And so we'll build this page together, including the random elements that we're suggesting as we go along. And because I've done that a number of times, and I generally, when I'm doing workshops and teaching in front of classes, that's generally how we construct pages. So that's how you end up with pages where the kids that are playing hockey on the rink made in their backyard, they're sausage people. They're all made out of hot dogs, and they're not kicking a puck around. It's a hamburger, and the horse is the referee. And so that's how you end up with pages like that. So, there, lost the chat. See you soon. All right, well, see you soon. Thanks very much. But yeah, Tuesday, if people are interested in coming out and hanging out and joining in, by all means, please let me know. Or even still just come on out. It'll be a lot of fun. But in the meantime, I got work, as do probably many of you as well. Thanks very much, everybody, for coming out. Thank you very much, Lindra, the moderator with the mostest, and everybody else that's come and joined us today. And thank you, everybody, for taking part in our conversation. Robert and Doug and Susanna, Linda. And, I'm curious. I'd love to see how you're working out, if you're working on sequential pages. I'd like to see what your approach is and stuff like that. So feel free to share that, folks. And yeah, that's it for me for now. I'll be posting some stuff promoting Tuesday. But everybody have a great day. Everybody have a great weekend. Bye for now.